All right, so these feet have firmed up now to a consistent level with the rest of this cup. You get a nice leather hard push on it, pull on it. And it's not gonna distort or anything like that. So I wanna start thinking about how I'm gonna apply slip to things, right? So again, I've got the white slip here. This is kind of our main, well, white slip. And then all of our other slips are kind of colored based on adding pigments to this. Except for the black one, that's a slip on its own. But the blue, yellow, red, green, and brown all come from this slip, and it's tinted, kind of like when you buy paint from the hardware store. So you can use any of the colors on any of the pieces. They're not going to come out shiny until after they get glaze on them, and we'll talk about that later. Something we want to think about is, because of the ceramic process, the firing process, right now this looks gray, if you can see that. It's going to be white later. Maybe not after the first bisque firing, not as it dries, but not until it's done firing all the way. And that goes for all of them. The red and yellow both have a hint of that. The brown is brown. The black is kind of a light black. But the blue is, because of what we use to pigment the blue, it is very similar to the white slip. So just be aware that even though they'll say one thing, but sometimes they look different. The blue kind of, again, looks almost this kind of light gray, but it'll be blue afterwards. And there's a big test tile board kind of thing that I'll show in class. That'll kind of show what they look like, and then with what other glazes on top of them. But to start with this one, I'm just going to put this nice white slip on it. And I'm just going to use this container, but you can also pour this into other containers. Sometimes we have small containers around. That way we don't all have to sit around the same thing of glaze, or slip, excuse me. So I'm just going to grab a brush and paint this on. So what is slip? So let's jump back to that really quick as I brush this on. Slip is basically just clay that has been slaked down with water. And so what is slaked? Slaked essentially just means that it's been soaked in water. And then we run it through a screen so that there's no lumps in it. It's kind of like a food mill if you've ever used one of those. So you can just brush this on the surface, like so. I'm going to put this on the bottom. When we get to talking about glazes, we won't put glazes on the bottom, but we can put slip on the bottom. And so you can see it's kind of wet, kind of shiny. This cup is kind of nice and dry, so the slip's actually drying up pretty fast. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a second coat on. If your cup's on the wetter side, the slip will stay wet longer. For the white in particular, two really good coats is usually enough. Really for any of them, like 2 coats is usually pretty good. The black you can get away with 1 sometimes. But if you can see, it doesn't always apply super even. So sometimes a second coat will help kind of even things out. If we think about this, I'm saying that it's slaked down clay. You can almost think about it as mud, even though it's not mud. But the idea of painting with mud isn't always super easiest. So you notice when I put this on, it's going to dip my brush, maybe do 1 stroke or 2 strokes. I don't want to do a lot of back and forth sort of thing like you might do with an acrylic or an oil. It just won't have a very good effect. And then I'm just going to let this set to the side real quick. I'm going to go ahead and throw 1 more coat of this white on really quick before I do other stuff to it. So what I think about with these slips is that they are very opaque. So if we put one over top of the other, we're most likely just gonna see the whatever slip is on top, with 1 exception, well, 2 exceptions. Those 2 exceptions are the black and the brown slip. If I were to have put black slip on this first and then put the white slip over it, then the black slip would just basically be pulled through to the surface, and you would see that and not any of the white slip. But I can put, so I can put, like, at this point I can put the black slip on top of the white. I can put any of them on top of the white. I just want to be careful with putting the white on top of the black or brown, or anything on top of the black or brown, because they are so so dominant that they'll just show right through. So there's a video about Mishima, which is all about filling cracks. And so there's also a technique that's called sgraffito. And sgraffito is more about the act of drawing into the clay. And so I've got a white slip and then the grayish clay color. So now if I scrape through the white and expose the clay underneath, that's more of what we call the technique of sgraffito. Again, I can use anything for that. I wouldn't recommend a needle tool just because the line is so fine, it generally doesn't turn out very good unless you're trying to make like a really exact pattern. The wooden knife works really well. Pencil works really well. Anything that kind of has a little bit broader of a tip can work really well. And it basically just becomes, you know, drawing, or basically just, you know, scraping that top layer away. And again, there's usually, you know, little boogers of clay that come out of it that can just scrape away. And this can be a good way to draw, you know, imagery, draw a pattern. And I can use some of this to inform myself later when I go to glaze. You know, that's pretty simplistic, just some lines coming off of those feet, but that's the idea of sgraffito. I can just put some lines down with a liner brush if I want to. You know, if I want to as well, I can, you know, take some of this slip and paint it on the inside, if we wanted to. But, you know, we are going to be using glazes on the inside of here as well. So mostly, you know, project-wise, we're worried about slip on the outside for decoration. But these ones, we're not as concerned about decoration on the inside. You know, it's more the practicality of functionality on the inside. But sometimes you might want a white inside versus a gray inside. If we want to think about the slip, a real basic way, so like, you know, if we use glazes on top of these slips, or on top of the clay has a gray color to it, a stony gray color, where the slip will have a white color to it. So if we think about like even painting a room, you know, starting with a white background versus a brown or a gray background is going to affect that glaze on top of it. As we talk about glazes, we'll talk about how they're all basically just glass or tinted glass, colored glass, things like that. So I'm going to have, some of them are going to be really opaque, but some are going to be really translucent. So what the clay color looks like, you know, gray versus a white slip is going to change that glaze. And we'll have examples to talk about that as well.